Hello, my name is Susan Blank, and I'm an endocrinologist who works with the Virginia Department of Health. Thank you for joining me for this learning session, which is part of the Virginia Healthy Hearts Initiative. Today, our topic is prediabetes, and I'm especially excited to talk to you about this topic because I believe prediabetes provides a wonderful opportunity for both individuals and communities to reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes and improve heart health. Let's get started. We're going to start by defining prediabetes, then talk a little bit about why people should care about prediabetes, and then move on to talk about screening and diagnosis and ways to reverse prediabetes. You can think of prediabetes as an intermediate step between normal blood sugar and type 2 diabetes. Both prediabetes and type 2 diabetes are disorders of blood sugar regulation caused by insulin resistance. Insulin is a hormone that's made in the pancreas, and the job of insulin is to control the blood sugars within a normal range and to allow cells throughout the body to use that sugar as an energy source. When somebody has insulin resistance, it means the body is not as responsive as usual to the insulin, so the pancreas has to make more insulin to do the same job, and over time it can be difficult for the pancreas to keep up, and eventually the blood sugars start to rise. With prediabetes, the blood sugars are above normal, but they're not yet as high as they are in type 2 diabetes. You may be thinking, why should I care about prediabetes? After all, it's just prediabetes, it's not type 2 diabetes. How important is it really? It turns out that there are a few important reasons why all of us should care about prediabetes, and we're going to talk about some of those now. The first reason to care about prediabetes is that it's incredibly common. 2 out of 5 American adults have prediabetes, and the rates go up as people get older. By the time people are over the age of 65, half of them will have prediabetes. Unfortunately, 80% of people with prediabetes don't even know that they have it. And that's because prediabetes doesn't cause anything in the way of symptoms. So the only reason people know that they have it is if a doctor has screened for it with a blood test. Another reason to care about prediabetes is that it increases the risk of type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes is associated with higher risks of a whole bunch of other things that you don't want, including heart disease, strokes, blindness, kidney failure, and amputations. And even in people who don't go on to develop type 2 diabetes, prediabetes increases the risk of heart disease and strokes. The bad news is that without lifestyle changes, 7 out of 10 people with prediabetes will go on and develop type 2 diabetes. But the good news is that with lifestyle changes, people with prediabetes can cut their risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease in half. That's why it's very important to know if you have prediabetes so that you can take action and improve your health. Now we're going to move on and talk about screening and diagnosis. Because prediabetes doesn't cause any symptoms, it's very important that people get screened for prediabetes. And one simple way to assess your risk of prediabetes is to take something called the prediabetes risk test. And this is a really simple test consisting of 7 questions. We're going to walk through it together now, and what I'd love for you to do is count up on your fingers the number of points you're getting as we go along, and then we'll talk about the results at the end. The first question is, how old are you? If you're younger than 40, you get 0 points. Between 40 and 49 years old, you get 1 point. If you're between 50 and 59 years old, you get 2 points. And if you're 60 or older, you get 3 points. And the points go up as you get older because the risk of prediabetes increases as we age. Question number 2 is, are you a man or are you a woman? If you're a man, you get 1 point. And if you're a woman, you get 0 points. Men are at higher risk for prediabetes in part because they tend to gain weight in their bellies, whereas women, especially before menopause, tend to gain weight in their hips. And we know that belly fat causes more metabolic problems, including insulin resistance, which can lead to prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. Question number 3 is, if you are a woman, have you ever been diagnosed with gestational diabetes? And gestational diabetes is a particular kind of diabetes that occurs during pregnancy. If you answer yes to this question, you get 1 point, and if you answer no, you get 0 points. The reason for this is that pregnancy is kind of a stress test for the pancreas. Normal pregnancy causes some insulin resistance. In general, the pancreas is able to compensate by making more insulin, but in some cases, the pancreas has a hard time fully keeping up, which can lead to higher blood sugars and a diagnosis of gestational diabetes. Usually, after the pregnancy is over, the gestational diabetes entirely resolves and women have normal blood sugars, but it can be a sign that if you develop more insulin resistance over time, perhaps as a result of just getting older or maybe gaining some weight, that you're at increased risk for prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. Question number 4 is, do you have a mother, father, sister, or brother with diabetes? If you answer yes to this question, you get 1 point, and if you answer no, you get 0 points. This is because there is a genetic component to prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, and it tends to run in families. Question number 5 is, have you ever been diagnosed with high blood pressure? If you answer yes, you get 1 point, and if you answer no, you get 0 points. The connection between high blood pressure and prediabetes is because the two conditions share risk factors, including unhealthy eating patterns, lack of physical activity, excess weight, and chronic inflammation. So if you have one of them, you're more likely to have the other. Question number 6 is, are you physically active? And for the purpose of this question, physically active is defined as getting at least 150 minutes of exercise a week where your heart rate is getting elevated. 150 minutes a week would be the equivalent of getting around 30 minutes of exercise 5 times a week. If you answer yes to this question, you get 0 points, and if you answer no, you get 1 point. And that's because we know that physical activity and exercise improves insulin sensitivity and decreases the risk of prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. The final question, question number 7, is, what is your weight status? And to answer this question and determine how many points you get, we're going to use the following height and weight charts to look up your height and weight. So for example, if you are 5 feet 5 inches tall and you weigh 200 pounds, we would look in the height column and go down till we see 5 feet 5 inches, and then we follow across until we find your weight. So in this situation, 200 pounds falls between 180 pounds and 239 pounds, so you would fall in the second column, and if we go down to the bottom of that column, we see that you would get 2 points. For another example, if you are 6 feet tall and you weigh 300 pounds, again, we'd go to the height column, we find 6 feet tall, and then we look across until we find your weight category. So in this situation, you weigh 300 pounds, which would fall in this third column where it says 294 plus. We go down to the bottom of that column and we see that you would get 3 points. If your weight falls under the amounts listed in the first column of weights, that means you get 0 points. Hopefully you've been following along and counting up your points on your fingers. Now it's the time to total everything up. Is your score 5 or above? If your answer is yes, that means that you're at increased risk for prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, and you should talk to your primary care provider to see if any additional testing is needed. We're going to talk about what that testing might look like in just a minute, but first I just want to note that the prediabetes risk test can be a great thing to share with family members and friends, and there's some online risk calculators that are good to do this. One can be found at a website that's called doihaveprediabetes.org, and I've included both the website and a QR code that will take you there in case you want to share it with family members and friends. Both prediabetes and diabetes are diagnosed with blood tests. These are the type of blood tests that you should receive if you scored high on that prediabetes risk test. It's also recommended that everyone over the age of 35 who is overweight get one of these tests every 3 years automatically, and that screening be done even earlier or more frequently for people who have additional risk factors. And there are a few different types of blood tests that we use. The first and most common one is called the hemoglobin A1C. This is a test that looks at the average blood sugar over a 2 to 3 month time period. The next is a fasting blood sugar. This is a blood sugar that is measured after not eating for 8 to 12 hours. So generally to do this, you would not eat after midnight and have the blood test done first thing in the morning. And the third test, which isn't done as frequently, is called a glucose tolerance test. And this is when a blood sugar is measured after drinking a standardized sugary drink. Over here on the left, you can see how these blood tests are used to diagnose prediabetes and diabetes. For the hemoglobin A1C test, a normal value is below 5.7. It's considered prediabetes if it's between 5.7 and 6.4, and considered diabetes if it's 6.5 or above. For the fasting blood sugar test, normal is 99 or below. It's considered prediabetes between 100 and 125, and diabetes if it's 126 and above. And for the glucose tolerance test, a normal value is 140 or less. A prediabetes value would be between 140 and 199, and it's considered a diagnosis of diabetes if it's 200 or above. Now that you understand the importance of prediabetes and how it's diagnosed, let's talk about what can be done to reverse it. A prediabetes diagnosis provides both a wake-up call and an important opportunity to take action to prevent type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. We know this from a landmark study called the Diabetes Prevention Program study. In this study, they took over 3,000 people with prediabetes and they assigned them to 3 different groups. The first group received a medication called metformin, which is typically used to treat people with type 2 diabetes. The second group received a lifestyle change program. The goals of this program included people losing at least 7% of their body weight and exercising at least 150 minutes a week. And then the third group was a placebo group. So they didn't get anything special and just continued with their usual care and lifestyle. And we can see the results over here on the right. This axis looks at the number of years in the study, and this axis looks at the cumulative incidence of diabetes. So the percentage of people who developed type 2 diabetes over the course of the study. And if we look at the groups, the placebo group is shown here in blue, and here you see a steady increase in the percentage of people with type 2 diabetes. If we look at the red line, that's for metformin, and you see they do better. There are lower rates of type 2 diabetes, but the green line, which is the lifestyle line, is the one that does the best. And when they analyzed the final results, the metformin group lowered their risk of type 2 diabetes by 31%, but the lifestyle group was able to decrease their risk of type 2 diabetes by 58%, or over half. The original Diabetes Prevention Program study only lasted a few years, but it turns out that these interventions had lasting effect. When they looked at the data after 22 years of follow-up, the lifestyle group still had a 25% lower risk of type 2 diabetes. They also analyzed the long-term data to look at cardiovascular disease risk. When they looked at the different groups in the diabetes prevention program, they didn't see any difference between the groups, but if they looked at just the people who did best in the course of the study. So these were people who achieved remission, which means they were able to get their blood sugar levels out of the prediabetes range and back into the normal range during the course of the study. They found that after 20 years, the people who achieved remission had less than half of the cardiovascular risk than those who did not. So we learned from these studies that lifestyle changes and normalization of blood sugars can have lasting positive benefits on health, both for type 2 diabetes risk and also for cardiovascular risk. The lifestyle change component from the original diabetes prevention program study has been turned into a CDC-supported program designed to help people with prediabetes prevent or delay type 2 diabetes. Some of these programs are called diabetes prevention programs after the original study. Other versions are called Prevent T2, but they all basically work the same. They're a one-year program that meets once a week for the first 6 months and then generally monthly after that. They're both in-person and online formats, and they're often covered by insurance. You meet with a lifestyle change coach and a small group of peers with prediabetes to discuss healthy eating, active living, and how to overcome challenges. And the goal of the program is to achieve a 5 to 7% weight loss and for people to be doing 150 minutes of physical activity a week. These can be great ways to take control of your prediabetes and decrease your risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. There are programs like this available in Virginia, and you can go to the Virginia Department of Health website, which you see the address for there, along with a QR code to find a program near you. There are some components of the diabetes prevention program which can be helpful for anyone to incorporate into their daily life because they can both help prevent prediabetes and also help reverse it if you already have prediabetes. The first is to focus on making healthy food choices. When we're worried about blood sugars, one of the things that we especially want to pay attention to is minimizing the added sugars in our diet. And added sugars are sugars that are added during food processing, not naturally occurring sugars like those found in fruits and dairy products. And these added sugars are found in a wide variety of processed foods. They're not only in sodas and desserts where we might expect them, but also in granola bars and flavored yogurts and pasta sauces. The recommended daily limit for added sugars is to keep it under 9 teaspoons or 36 grams for men and under 6 teaspoons or 25 grams for women. This may sound pretty generous, but in reality, Americans are blowing past these limits. The average American is taking in 17 teaspoons of added sugar a day. So this is something that all of us need to pay more attention to and work on. Some tips for trying to cut back on added sugars. The first is just to eat more whole unprocessed foods. If you're eating whole unprocessed foods like fruits and vegetables, you're not going to be taking in any added sugars. When we do eat processed foods, we want to pay attention to the added sugar line on the label. And a good rule of thumb is that 4 grams of sugar equals 1 teaspoon of sugar. I think it's a lot easier to think in terms of teaspoons than grams. You also want to rethink your drink and make water and black coffee your go-tos. There's a lot of sugar, not just in sodas, but also in energy drinks and sports drinks and fancy coffees. And also, if you're craving something sweet, try something with natural sugar in it, like fruit. Another good idea if you're trying to control your blood sugars is to try to increase your fiber intake. Fiber has a whole lot of positive benefits, and it specifically slows digestion and also limits blood sugar spikes, which can help with blood sugars and the risk of prediabetes and type 2 diabetes. Fiber can be found in a whole bunch of different foods, including vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds. Another great thing to do to help prevent or reverse prediabetes is to get increased physical activity. The goal of the diabetes prevention program is to get at least 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity physical activity. And that is actually consistent with the general guidelines for all American adults. Some tips for trying to fit this in. First, find forms of movement that you enjoy. Walking is a great go-to for a lot of people, but for you, it might be pickup basketball or pickleball or jazzercise. You just want to find something that you enjoy and will stick to. Next, make it social. It's a lot more fun to exercise with a friend, and it also introduces some accountability. You're much less likely to skip a workout if you know that someone else is counting on you. If finding time for exercise is a challenge, try doing it in smaller chunks. So instead of trying to exercise 30 minutes all at once, you could try to do 10 minutes 3 times a day. And another great idea for people who are worried about their blood sugars is to try to incorporate short walks after meals. Research has shown that taking a short walk after you eat can help reduce blood sugar spikes and improve insulin sensitivity. We know that for people who are overweight, modest weight loss on the order of 5 to 7% can have a significant impact on prediabetes. And to give you a sense as to what that looks like, for a 200-pound person, 5 to 7% weight loss would be losing between 10 and 14 pounds. The balance between calorie intake and calories burned affects weight. Calories are a measure of energy. We take in calories in the form of food, and then we burn them in a couple different ways. We burn some all the time just by being alive. That's called the basic metabolic rate. And then we can also burn additional calories through physical exercise. So if we take in more calories than we burn, that can lead to weight gain. And if we take in fewer calories than we burn, that can lead to weight loss. So if we're looking to alter the balance between calories in and calories out in order to lose weight, there are a couple ways that we can go about this. One is to try to decrease calorie intake. You can do this in a few different ways. One is to just eat smaller portions. Some people find that it's really helpful to switch from large dinner plates to smaller plates like salad plates, because that can kind of trick your mind into being happy with smaller portions without feeling deprived. You can also try to cut back on snackings and avoid going back for seconds. Try not to drink a bunch of calories. Really make water and black coffee, if you're drinking coffee, your go-to drinks. And also try to eat foods that are high in fiber. Not only will this help reduce blood sugar spikes, it will also help keep you feeling full and satisfied so you don't eat as much. And on the calories burned side, you can increase calories burned by getting increased physical activity. In summary, prediabetes is both a threat and an opportunity. Without lifestyle changes, the majority of people with prediabetes will go on to develop type 2 diabetes, and prediabetes is also associated with increased risk of heart disease and strokes. However, with lifestyle changes, people with prediabetes can cut their risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease in half. That's why it's incredibly important for people to get screened for prediabetes and to take action if they're diagnosed with prediabetes. I want to finish by zooming out for a couple minutes and talking about how to help reverse prediabetes in not just yourselves, but in your communities. First, lead by example. Get screened for prediabetes if you're at higher risk, and join a diabetes prevention program if you have prediabetes. You can also help by sharing and educating. Talk to friends and family members about the risks of prediabetes, share the online prediabetes risk calculator, and encourage people to get screened. If you don't know that you have prediabetes, you can't take action to reduce your risks. You can help organize heart-healthy activities. Programs like prediabetes and diabetes screening events, walking groups, and cooking classes can help build healthy communities and decrease the risk of prediabetes. And also advocate for change. Support policies for things like healthcare access, healthy food access, and infrastructure like public parks, sidewalks, and bike lanes that helps everyone stay active and healthy. This concludes today's session. Thank you very much for your time and attention. I hope you've learned some useful information about prediabetes that will help keep you and your communities healthy. If you're interested in more information on prediabetes, including where to find a diabetes prevention program near you, I have included the website address as well as a QR code for the Virginia Department of Health page on diabetes and prediabetes, along with the website address and a QR code for the heart disease page if you're more interested in general information on heart health. Thanks a lot and have a great day.